It's time to paint, so let's talk about some paint procedures. Let's start by finding the painting center. So most of your paint stuff is going to be right here in the painting center. One of the most important things to remember when you're painting is trying to keep yourself clean. It helps to be mindful while you're painting so that you don't get paint on you or your clothes or all over our tables or on someone else. So one way we start with that is using messy mats. So these are right here. We always put those underneath our artwork when we're painting. Another way to stay clean is by wearing a smock. A smock helps keep your clothes covered. You can also bring your own shirt that you want to use to cover up your clothes. I have two kinds of smocks. I have t-shirts that are cut up the back that you can wear, and I have apron style smocks. When you're painting, there's two ways you can make yourself water for paint. We have a kitty cat bowl right here that has water in it. Brushes are on one side, and then the sponge on the other side is used for wiping off your brush. This keeps you from tapping your brush on the edge of the bowl and getting water on everyone and everyone's artwork. You could also use one of our little paint cups right here, and you can fill that up with water. And I have some extra sponges around the room that you can put on the tray. Putting these pieces on trays helps keep the excess water that often falls out of both of these on the tray and off the table. So it's a great way to make yourself water for painting. Now, where can you find the paint you need? We have a couple different kinds of paints. I have some watercolor palettes over here. I have some tempera cakes that work just like watercolors by adding water to them. And then we have our tempera paint over here. Sometimes we'll also use acrylics. So how I want you to make paint this year is using these containers right here, and I'll show you how to use them. So when you're ready to make paint, you need a palette. Palettes are in the palette drawer right here, and sometimes they're also over here on our drying rack after they've been washed. So you want to open the drawer, get out a palette, and start making paint. Okay, for painting this year, when we're using tempera or acrylic, they are going to be in these containers. They're also in our gallon containers, but I'm just trying to have the paint in these so it's easier for you to make yourself a palette, okay? So these are going to work kind of like condiment bottles, like where your mustard or ketchup would come out of. I put the paint in the top when it needs to be refilled, and then the paint comes out of the bottom. That means you're always kind of using that newer paint when you're squeezing it out of the bottle. So here's kind of how it works. So you take the bottle and you squeeze it into your palette, okay? You don't need to have any more paint than what fits in that little circle on your palette. When you are making paint, you can always come back and make more, but sometimes you have too much and then that can be wasteful, and we run out of paint quicker that way. So you just need to fill up the little circles on the palette, and if you need more, come back and get more. What about brushes? So when you need a brush, there are brushes over here on the top of my painting center. So on the top, this is usually kind of texture brushes. So they have different textures, and I have my paint scrapers where you can make different textures in your paint. These over here are watercolor brushes, so you can actually put the water inside of them when you're using watercolor paints. Then underneath that, we have these brushes. So these are my nicer brushes. So when you're really trying to do a nice, clean painting, these are the brushes you want to use. You have your square tip ones right here. So these are all different sizes with the square tips. And then underneath that, you have the round tips. So these are all different sizes in the round tips. The ones I use most often, because I use them kind of with all ages, are my really big ones with the straight tip. So those are kind of jumbo. So if you want a smaller one, just come up here and get a smaller one for more of your details. Over here, most of these paintbrushes are kind of extra. I have a lot of extras and older brushes in here. A lot of these are the ones that come with the watercolor sets. And then down here, these are typically the brushes I use for glue and things like that, messier, stickier stuff. These brushes are not in great shape, so this is kind of my bottom of the barrel brush drawer. What about when we're done painting? So when you're done painting, the best thing to do is keep your artwork on the messy mat, especially if it's small, and then take it over to the drying rack. Keeping your artwork on the messy mat on the drying rack helps it from falling through. So sometimes, especially when we're painting on that 9x12 size, our paintings will fall through those extra spaces in the drying rack. So this is a great way to keep your paint safe, okay? So it can either be on the black drying rack, the tall drying rack over here, and I'll usually tell you in class where to put it, or I also have this drying rack back here. If you need to save your paint when you're done painting, you can always cover it with aluminum foil, write your name on it, and save it for the next day. If you don't need to save your paint, you can put it here in the sink. The best way I like to clean our brushes and our palettes is by soaking them. Usually at the end of class, we don't have enough time to wash every palette, and we just don't have enough space. So what I usually do is have everybody soak their brushes and their palettes. When we get really busy, I often say one side for palettes and one side for brushes. That helps me clean them at the end of the day. And after they've been soaking in soap all day, it comes off really quick. So sometimes you'll come in the morning and you'll see lots of brushes and palettes over here, and you can pick them from here also, because this is where they have gone to dry. When you're drying, if you do wash, your paintbrushes need to have bristles up. Don't put the hair on the brush down on the bottom, because if you do, then that messes up the nice edges of your paintbrush and it'll make it dry all funky, kind of like this one right here. Okay, so you want to do it with the bristles up. Think about it with their hair up, like this little smiling paintbrush over here. Okay, I think we're ready to paint. We know where to find our paint, we know where to find our supplies, we know where to find our brushes, and we know how to clean things. We also know where to put our paintings. So some things to remember. When you're painting, painting can be messy. Always be mindful of the people around you. Be mindful if you have long sleeves on, often push your long sleeves up, because most of the paint accidents we have are people accidentally putting their sleeve through their artwork or maybe on their palette. So just pay attention to what's going on around you. Make sure when you're walking with either your painting or your paint palette that you're not running into anybody or running or anything like that, because you might get paint all over the floor or all over somebody else. It's happened. So just pay attention to what you're doing, take your time, and make sure always, one of the most important things when we paint is that our artwork makes it onto the drying rack, and that our palettes and our paintbrushes are soaking at the end of class. That way we have paint supplies that will last, and you'll be able to paint as much as you want. All right, I'll see you soon.